Today, millions of people enter the home of someone they have never met before, sleep in their bed, and send their money weeks in advance. However, Airbnb's first major source of income was not accommodation. It was cereal boxes prepared specifically for the election period. So why did this idea, which investors rejected repeatedly, not die? How was the trust established that allowed people to open their most private spaces to strangers? Did cereal really save the company, or did it only show how far the founders were willing to go? And in the rise of Airbnb, how effective were the economic crisis, technology, and right timing, along with perseverance? At the end of this story, you will see that the real product of Airbnb is not a bed, but a trust system that makes transactions possible between strangers. The story is often told as three young men putting air mattresses in their living room to pay the rent in 2008. However, the beginning was a bit different. The first idea emerged in the autumn of 2007 between Gebbia and Brian Chesky, who were living in San Francisco. Both were graduates of the Rhode Island School of Design. Gebbia lived in the city. Chesky had just moved in with him without a steady job. Rent was approaching, and the money was not enough. Just in those days, a major design conference was being held in San Francisco. Most of the hotels in the city were full. Gebbia suggested turning the empty space in their apartment into money. They would put 3 air mattresses in the living room and offer guests a place to stay and breakfast. They prepared a simple website. They named it Air Bed and Breakfast. 3 people made reservations. The arriving guests stayed on air mattresses in the home of 2 strangers, not in a standard hotel room. Chesky and Gebbia had breakfast with them, showed them around the city, and experienced the hosting journey firsthand. This first trial showed them something important. People could be willing to stay in the home of someone they never knew before when the right conditions were met. But 3 guests were not a business model. There was only an interesting experiment. Moreover, the idea was not entirely new. People had been staying in guest houses, rented rooms, and the homes of others for centuries. Short-term home rental websites also existed on the internet. The fundamental problem Airbnb would solve was not the lack of empty beds in the world. The real problem was that people who did not know each other could not trust the same transaction. The host did not know who they were opening their door to. The guest was not sure if the house they saw in the photos on the internet really existed. One party was risking their home, and the other was risking their money and safety. For this reason, the biggest competitor of Airbnb was not just hotels. It was the fear of strangers in the minds of people. In 2008, software engineer Nathan Blecharczyk joined the team. Thus, the trio was complete. While Chesky and Gebbia focused on design, brand, and user experience, Blecharczyk was the person who could turn the idea into a working technology platform. Their first strategy was to target cities where large events were held and hotels were full. The logic was simple. The number of hotel rooms was fixed. However, there were thousands of unused rooms, couches, and beds in the city. The internet could make this invisible capacity visible. This approach, which seemed logical on paper, did not find an immediate response in real life. Air Bed and Breakfast received only a few reservations when it was launched again during the South by Southwest event in Austin in 2008. One of the reservations was made by Brian Chesky himself.
Later, they reached about 80 reservations during the Democratic National Convention in Denver. This was a great improvement compared to the first trial. However, when the event ended, the demand also dropped. This situation revealed a dangerous question. Would people use this service only when no hotel rooms were left in the city? If the answer was yes, the market could remain limited to a few big events. There was a large gap between the future the founders saw and the reality the investors saw. The trio started looking for investment. They reached 7 investors in the summer of 2008. They were ready to give 10% of the company for about $150,000. 5 investors rejected the offer. 2 investors did not even reply. Looking back from today, one might think these people missed a great opportunity. But that day, investors did not have a global giant in front of them. There was a small startup that did not produce regular income, whose customers only appeared during big events, and which was based on a very risky assumption about human behavior. When success stories are told retrospectively, the result seems as if it were certain from the beginning. However, failure seemed much more likely in the early years of Airbnb. The company did not have a strong growth chart, a proven customer habit, or a revenue model to reassure investors. Therefore, it would not be right to blame their rejection solely on the lack of vision of the investors. The founders had not yet turned their ideas into a repeatable and reliable business. Money was running out. Chesky and Gebbia were overwhelmed by credit card debt. The income the company earned from its own service was insufficient. Just at this time, the United States presidential election occupied the agenda of the country. The race between Barack Obama and John McCain was being discussed everywhere, from news to television programs. The founders found an extraordinary idea to turn this interest into money. They designed 2 special cereal boxes named Obama O's and Cap'n McCain's. A printer agreed to print a limited number of boxes in exchange for a share of the sales. Chesky and Gebbia bought cheap cereal from grocery stores. They folded and glued the boxes by hand and numbered each one. They turned an ordinary breakfast product into a limited edition collector's item belonging to the election period. They sold each box for $40. People were certainly not paying $40 for the cereal inside. They were paying for the humorous memory of a current political moment, a story that could be told, and the feeling of a limited edition. Obama O's boxes sold out quickly. Cap'n McCain's did not see the same interest. Despite this, about $30,000 in revenue was obtained from the sales. This money covered some of the debts and gave the team a little more time. However, there was an important distinction. Selling cereal did not prove that Airbnb's accommodation business worked. The founders had found money temporarily, but the main company still could not create regular demand. The cereal story is often reduced to a simple, never give up message. Yet there is a more valuable lesson here. Chesky and Gebbia combined their design skills, a current event, and the attention mechanism of the media. The product was not just cereal. The product was a story that people would want to tell others. Instead of sending an ordinary press release to journalists, they sent a physical object they could display on their desks. These boxes did not solve the problem of the company, but they showed that the founders could attract attention, design products, and make sales with limited resources.
Sometimes, the first important proof of a startup is not the perfection of the main idea, but the capacity of the team to act in conditions that seem impossible. Still, Airbnb was not back from the dead yet. After a while, Michael Seibel suggested that the team apply to the startup accelerator program called Y Combinator. The founders hesitated at first. They thought they had already launched their products and were late for an accelerator program. In reality, the company was in the market but could not survive. They applied and were called for an interview. Paul Bram, one of the founders of Y Combinator, had difficulty understanding why people would stay on the air mattresses of strangers. The interview did not seem to be going well. Just as they were about to leave, Joe Gebbia took out the cereal boxes he had brought with him. The trio explained why they prepared these boxes and how they sold them to keep the company alive. What caught Graham's attention was not a perfect market presentation, it was how many extraordinary things this team could do to avoid dying. Airbnb was accepted into Y Combinator at the beginning of 2009 and received an investment of $20,000. The cereal boxes had not validated the business model of the company, but they had made the creativity, durability, and sales skills of the founders visible. During the Y Combinator period, the team began to see its main problem more clearly. Airbnb did not need to reach millions of users in the first stage. First, it had to prove that the transaction worked repeatedly in a small market. A significant part of the reservations were coming from New York. Chesky and Gebbia got on a plane, went to the city, and began to visit the hosts one by one. This move seemed contrary to the usual understanding of growth for internet companies. Technology startups were expected to be scalable, meaning they should not require the founders to work personally for every customer. However, the Airbnb founders were not yet growing a scalable system. They were trying to understand why people were not making reservations. Most of the listings had dark, blurry, and careless photos. Guests could not see the house properly. The founders rented a professional camera, went to the houses, and took the listing photos themselves. This intervention, which seemed small at first glance, increased reservations. Because a bad photo was not just an aesthetic problem, it was a trust problem. Dark and uncertain images enlarged the doubt about whether the house really existed. Better photos did not just make the place look beautiful, they also carried the message that the host put effort into the listing. People were going to enter the home of someone they did not know. For this reason, image quality directly turned into a trust signal. As the founders talked face-to-face with the hosts, they learned other things too. Many people needed extra income to cover their rent or mortgage payments, just as they did in their early days. The United States was going through a severe economic crisis. Hosts wanted to turn their unused spaces into money, while travelers were looking for more affordable options compared to hotels. Timing was decisive here. Airbnb was not just a good idea, it emerged at a time when economic pressure made both supply and demand open to new solutions. For this reason, attributing success only to the perseverance of the founders remains incomplete. The team developed the right product, but they did it at a time when people were more willing to try unusual methods to earn money and save. The New York efforts began to yield results. The weekly income of the company rose from a few $100s to over $1,000. These figures were small for a giant business, but they proved something critical for Airbnb in its early stage.
In the same market, with similar interventions, a repeating growth was occurring. The founders now saw that people were not just trying this idea out of curiosity, but could use it again when the experience was designed correctly. However, good photos alone were not enough. Over time, Airbnb divided trust not into a single feature, but into layers that supported each other. User profiles, listing photos, in-platform messaging, secure payment, mutual evaluations left after the reservation, identity verification, and risk detection systems became parts of this structure. The power of this system was not in eliminating all the risk between strangers. Such a thing was not possible. Its power was in dividing uncertainty into measurable and manageable parts. The guest could see the photos of the house, read the comments of previous visitors, and talk to the host through the platform. The host could also examine the profile and past evaluations of the guest. Payment took place through an intermediary system instead of being made directly between two strangers. Every successful stay produced data that facilitated the next transaction. A comment did not just describe a past experience, it created a trust signal for future strangers. Thus, the most important asset of Airbnb was not the houses. The company did not own most of these houses. The real asset was the market bringing the two sides together, the accumulated reputation data, and the strengthening network effect. More hosts offered more options to travelers. More travelers made the platform more profitable for hosts. More transactions produced more comments and trust data. Airbnb was able to grow the accommodation supply without building new hotels. This was a completely different way of scaling than traditional hotel companies. In 2009, the company shortened its name from Airbed and Breakfast to Airbnb. The platform was not limited only to shared rooms and air mattresses. Apartments, detached houses, and holiday homes were also added to the system. This decision changed the size of the market. Now the product did not only appeal to young travelers looking for cheap beds during big events. Families, long-term stayers, those wanting privacy, and those staying in areas where no hotels were found also became potential users. This detail is important from an entrepreneurial perspective. The first product and the real market may not be the same thing. The first product of Airbnb was the air mattresses offered during conference days. The real market was the transformation of unused spaces in the world into short-term accommodation supply.
The founders did not stick blindly to their ideas. They changed the area of use while protecting the core of the idea. They moved from a small service that allowed people to sleep next to strangers to a global market where all types of houses and different accommodation types were listed. What made growth possible was not just loyalty to the first idea, but correctly understanding which part of the idea was valuable. You can like the video if what has been told so far shows why a great startup is not founded just with a good idea. Because what kept Airbnb alive was not a single bright moment. It was the combination of design, sales, technology, customer observation, economic conditions, and many small corrections. However, it would not be right to tell the story only as a victory. As the platform grew, trust problems did not disappear. They only changed form. Fake listings, damages occurring in houses, safety incidents, discrimination allegations, unauthorized parties, and fraud attempts constantly forced the company to develop new measures.
Airbnb developed protection programs for hosts, identity verification methods, reservation screening, fraud detection, and emergency support tools. However, no system can perfectly verify all users and all listings. Trust is not a product feature that is established once and completed. Every new country, every new user type, and every new method of abuse tests the system again. The size of the platform can strengthen trust because it produces more comments, more behavior data, and more past transactions. The same size can also increase the impact of mistakes and malicious behaviors. The success of Airbnb was not in eliminating the risk, it was in managing the risk to a level where enough people could make transactions. Growth had other costs as well. At the beginning, the prominent image was the ordinary host sharing their empty room to pay their rent. Over time, professional businesses managing whole apartments and commercial hosts with a large number of listings became more visible on the platform. Some cities argued that short-term rentals reduced the long-term housing supply, affected rents, and changed the structure of neighborhoods. As a result, Airbnb ceased to be just a technology company competing with the hotel sector. It placed itself at the center of housing policies, urban planning, and local regulations. Some cities introduced registration requirements, night limits, or rules requiring the host to be present in the residence. The growth of the platform created a housing debate much larger than the rent problem the founders initially tried to solve. Still, the change in scale was striking. The site that once listed a few air mattresses turned over the years into a global platform reaching millions of active listings and billions of guest arrivals. Staying in the home of a stranger may no longer be the right option for everyone. However, while it once was a strange behavior that needed to be explained, today it is one of the established parts of the travel market. So, what really saved Airbnb? Air mattresses showed that the idea was possible. Cereal boxes gave the founders money and time. Y Combinator gave the team the discipline of focusing and finding the first real market. New York Visits revealed the real problems of the users. The economic crisis pushed both hosts and travelers to new solutions. Photos, profiles, payments, and comments turned the fear between strangers into a manageable transaction. None of these created Airbnb alone. The company grew with the combination of these parts in the right order. Moreover, success did not arise only from the courage of the founders. Design education, technical skill, right partnerships, investment network, economic conditions, and the changing behaviors of the market were also decisive. The lesson to be drawn from this story is not that every rejected idea will one day turn into a billion-dollar company. Most rejected ideas really do not work. What is valuable is understanding why you were rejected instead of romanticizing the rejection. Airbnb founders did not just endure for a longer time. They fixed weak photos, talked face-to-face with their customers, expanded their market, and realized that the biggest obstacle was not accommodation supply, but trust. Their persistence gained meaning only because it was combined with their learning speed. Instead of doing the same thing over and over, they changed another part of the product after every failed attempt. They sold cereal, photographed the houses themselves, met with users, and adapted the narrow initial idea to a larger market. Not giving up was not enough on its own. It was necessary to continue by learning the right thing. 3 air mattresses that once stood on the floor of a small apartment in San Francisco have today become the symbol of millions of homes connecting to a global market.
But the real invention of Airbnb was not those beds. It was designing a system consisting of layers of identity, reputation, payment, and protection so that people could transact with strangers. What do you think is the real power that carries great startups to success? Is it the founders not giving up? Or their ability to notice the real problem at the right time and change their product? You can subscribe to Footprints to the Top to discover the decisions, mistakes, and unseen conditions behind the rise of companies. Because the story of those who reach the top often begins not with the brightest idea, but with solving the invisible obstacle within a problem that everyone sees.